So let's take all these concepts and put it directly into practice with a real world scenario. So for this first scenario, I'm actually using something that happened. And let's write a rule that identifies a rogue employee who terminates 100 or hundreds of systems in an AWS account. This actually caused millions of dollars of damage and really crippled that environment. So let's look how we can identify this behavior as it's happening in Panther. Sometimes an attacker will do this in a very slow, gradual mechanism, or they'll just do it all at once. So we'll look at a couple of different techniques that we can do to find both of those scenarios. So for this, we'll use CloudTrail data, which looks at all the API calls into an AWS account. And the patterns that we'll really look for are the terminate instance API calls. We'll look at a high volume of those. We saw that the attacker had wiped out 456 VMs. We'll also look for API calls from IAM users specifically, which may not be as applicable depending on how you set your accounts up. And then we'll look at the calls that are successful, because CloudTrail is logging everything, regardless of if it's successful or not. So as I mentioned, the first step is to baseline our system. And using the data explorer that is available in Panther Enterprise, we can query our logs, our Panther logs table, and get an understanding of who is terminating systems normally and what are the common attributes of those logs. We'll use those attributes to create samples for our rule and use it in our unit tests to make sure that we're covering the right use cases. So when you're creating new rules in the Panther UI, you'll go to the log analysis rules page, you'll click create new rule, and then you're presented with metadata about the rule. And the metadata is just an understanding of why does this rule exist? What's the severity of it? Which logs are we analyzing? And it just gives the system a basic set of settings to analyze in real time. Specifically, let's hone in on the dedupe period and the threshold. So again, the threshold means we're only going to send this alert if there's 10 or more events. And then the dedupe period says we're going to group those events within a 15-minute window, and then after that window, we're going to start a new alert. And then if we scroll down, we have our in-browser IDE, and then we put our logic. So we're looking at an event name of terminate instance, and we're saying no error code has been returned from this API call. And if this rule returns true, we'll get an alert either in Slack, PagerDuty, or whatever our team has set up for alerting. We'll get also a title of, some user has terminated a high volume of EC2 instances, which, looks pretty bad. And then finally, we're grouping based off of the ARN of this user identity, which could be a IAM user, it could be an IAM role, and you can customize this however you want. So coming back into the unit testing part. So what we can do is we can take certain things from our first baseline search, and then we can create these test events that cover both positive and negative use cases. So we wouldn't want this alert to fire if someone had tried to terminate an instance and it failed. We want to look at actually valid terminations. So that's one case we can cover here. And then we can actually also cover our positive use case, which is someone terminates an instance and it actually works. We can run all of these tests in our browser as well. And then every time that you go to update a rule, these tests must pass before you save the rule, which protects against regressions over time. And also, this rule can become more complex over time. It can have more conditions. You can add more use cases, test cases, and the rule browser really accommodates all of these different life cycles over time. So if we see an alert in our browser, if we see an alert in general, it'll send something to Slack, and we'll see an alert like this. So the screenshot that I'm showing here is from my own personal deployment that I have set up, and you can see that there's a new alert. It shows the interpolated title, which shows my username has terminated some high volume of EC2 instances, and you can click into the Panther UI, and then you're taken to an alert overview page that allows you to browse the events. It allows you to click into the data explorer again and get that SQL search, and then start your analysis. So that's the first scenario.